As we indicated in opening statements, and I think it was mentioned by the judge, it was mentioned in jury selection to not abandon your common sense as you approach your deliberations, which I think is very important. And we ask that you look at all the evidence and all the facts. But let's not be misled by defense arguments about emotion, about phone records, or things of that nature. If we're going to evaluate that, then we need to evaluate that in its entirety. Ms. Dunn has said several times that you can't allow emotion to sway your judgment in this particular case. I think she said it 2 or 3 times in her closing comments. Well, if that's the case, Exhibit 61, she wants you to see a picture of her client crying. And then on direct examination, she asked him if he was crying and asked him if he was scared, which he answered that he was. But why did she bring that evidence out? Well, she's wanting to play on your emotions. She's wanting you to think that he was scared and he was upset and he was crying, and so maybe he didn't do what he was alleged to have done. Well, you can't have it both ways. You can't say don't decide something on emotion, but yet bring out emotion for you to consider and for you to try and sway you. It doesn't work that way. The same way it doesn't work with these phone records and text messages. Exhibits 11 and 12 and you'll see the times on there when you get to take them back, and you'll see the text message that Ms. Nixon sent. Tell me if you want to talk whenever you're done. I'm getting back in the bed. And then there was another text message later that evening from Ms. Nixon that says, "Are you still busy, babe?" ? And this is Ms. Nixon said that she really doesn't know Mr. Walker, but for some reason she tells him when she's getting into bed, and she also calls him babe. But more importantly than that is Ms. Dunn wants you to believe that this text message was sent at 3:21:59 seconds. Tell me when you want to talk whenever you're done. Well, we believe that was sent as well, as was the other ones, as were all these other phone calls that Mr. Walker made, or the one he received during the moments before the crash, and then phone calls that he made afterwards. But if you're to accept these records, you have to accept them all. But the defense doesn't want you to accept them all. They want you to accept all the records except for the length of the phone conversation. Why would they want you to do that? Well, again, it's trying to confuse you. It's trying to sway you one way or another. But it's disingenuous, because if you're to take them for what they're worth, you have to take all of them for what they're worth. We can't pick and choose the facts that fit our scenario. Just like you can't say, don't be emotional, but have emotion for my client because he was crying and he was upset. Also, as far as that's concerned, another disingenuous part is to say that someone who is in a car who sees the bus and then follows the bus is not an eyewitness, but someone doing yard work that hears a speeding bus, comes down the street and watches down the street and sees this white van is an eyewitness, but not the person behind the bus driving. It doesn't work that way. They're both eyewitnesses. To call Miss Pierre not an eyewitness is troublesome. The reason for that is what does Miss Pierre not see? She never says that she saw cars coming her way, even after she stopped at sunset and called 911. She never sees any vehicles. They don't want you to think she's an eyewitness because that destroys their theory. And essentially, they don't want you to believe her. They want you to believe somewhat of what Miss Brogdon says about the white van. But what did Miss Brogdon say? He was zipping down the road, and she heard the kids wee, 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 and she described the bumps in the road as you're driving. So it's interesting. She says he's speeding. Miss Pierre says he's speeding. Joe Warren takes 2 approaches to prove that he's speeding, the yaw mark and the video mark. And earlier today, Mr. Walker himself said he was going 35 as he approached Sunset Avenue. So one thing that everybody agrees on is that he was speeding. And you know, then it gets to, well, Joe Warren's not credible because of this Northwestern School of Public Safety. or he doesn't use the preferred drag factor, things of this nature, that nature. Well, Mr. Walker told you he was responsible for the yaw marks seen here in Exhibit 20 and the yaw marks Exhibit 35, which is very top, almost near where the bus comes to rest. Joe Warren will tell us that the yaw marks at the top are some 43, 44 miles an hour. Can you imagine what the speed would have been if the bus would have been down below the hill? If the ones at the top of the hill, almost the end of the crash, are 44? I would submit to you that Officer Warren's estimate of somewhere between 46 and 51, they're accurate. And that is proof, and he testified to that, and Mr. Walker said that he's responsible for those yaw marks, responsible for that speed, and as he said, he is ultimately responsible for these kids. Now, there was a mention that we didn't prove that he went into a ditch. Okay. Well, there's a big difference here. We have to prove elements of an offense. Ms. Dunn talked about those earlier. We don't have to prove every fact known to man to prove him guilty of this crime. If everybody look at this and you remember the other angle, it just kind of showed the elevated driveway. Some people might call this a shoulder. Some people might call it the side of the road. Some might call it a ditch. Some might call it off the road. I'm sure there's a number of words that can be used to describe this. We don't have to prove that this is a ditch. All we have to prove is that he was acting recklessly in this county on this road, and it resulted in the death of 6 children and harm to many, many more. So don't be confused that, I don't know what we're supposed to do to put a sign out there that says this is a ditch. I'm not sure, but we don't have to prove that that's a ditch. That too is misleading. But when you get into the credibility of witnesses, Officer Warren was under intense cross-examination for a long period of time about not reading this book, or his drag factor's old, this, that, and the other. You heard all of that. But then Ms. Dunn wants you to believe the words of Mr. Walker. And talking about a physical impossibility, we need to evaluate, again, the phone record. Whether we like it or not, this is evidence. And you have to evaluate all of it. We can't take bits and pieces of it. And we'll see that the phone call was received at 3:17 and 20 seconds. And Mr. Walker's phone records show that it's active for 3 minutes and 50 seconds. So that would mean that the phone conversation ends somewhere around 3 minutes, 3 o'clock, 20 minutes after, and 10 seconds. Well, the next phone call that Mr. Walker makes outgoing is at 3:25. So a little under 5 minute difference. But why is that important? Well, it's important because at the time of the crash, we know on the crime scene log it says 15:20 or 3:20. The phone is, according to Mr. Walker, the phone is not with him. The phone is somewhere outside of the bus in the grass. And so he would have you to believe that in under 5 minutes, at a scene like this, that caused all this horror and all this damage, in under 5 minutes, someone found his cell phone and gave it to him, and he started making phone calls. We know he started making phone calls because he admitted to it, and that's what the records show. But if you recall in the videos, when the crash occurred, he gets out of the bus, other people get out of the bus. At some point, he gets back on the bus, and I would submit to you, he gets back on the bus to get his telephone. And then later in the video, he's in the rear of the vehicle, searching for other children, things of that nature. There's no way he could do all those things in under 5 minutes, and they find his telephone and give that back to him. And that's important because if he wants you to believe that, of course he wants you to believe that he wasn't driving too fast for Tally Road. Of course he wants you to believe that he swerved to miss this white van. Miss Brogdon never once said that the van was in oncoming traffic. She never once said that. The white vehicle was in its lane of travel. The reason that he swerves is because as he's going down Tally towards Sunset, he's going too fast for the curve. The back end of the bus slides out. That's where that first yaw begins. This white vehicle, he overcorrects, whether it's a ditch or a shoulder or the road or somebody's front yard. He drives through it. We know he pops up over this driveway, and we see Warren talked about how the tires hit down and the marks were darker at the front as they went. The yaw, another yaw continued 45 miles an hour on two wheels. It strikes the utility pole and then wrecks into the tree. The other thing that's disingenuous is to indicate that no one cared. I'm not sure why you would say something like that. Obviously, everybody involved with this particular thing cared, gave great investigative efforts, and they'll say, well, they didn't take anyone's statement. Well, Ms. Brogdon gave them a statement. Ms. Pierre took a statement. They told you what they saw, just like what they said in their statements. I don't know. It's hard for me to believe that if we're interested in seeking justice, that we pick and choose what we want you all to believe or not to believe. And unfortunately, in this arena that we're in, it doesn't work that way. We have to look at it all, not just bits and pieces of it. And she talked about resting easy. Well, and you will rest easy, because the fact of the matter is that on this particular day, for whatever reason, Mr. Walker decided to drive recklessly down Tally Road. He made that decision to exceed the speed limit. He made the decision to not respect Tally Road. Well, when we make decisions, we have to live with the results, the consequences. Well, the first result or consequence of recklessly driving down Tally Road is that he goes into the other lane of traffic. He has to overcorrect, hits a mailbox, smashes the utility pole and a tree. And what are the results or the consequences of that action? Well, as Ms. Carrion said, it was like no other day. That's true, just like today's essentially no other day, because on that day, 37 children on that bus did not come home safely. 6 went to an eternal home. Many went to the hospital. Some long-term care, as you'll read the exhibit of the injuries. They have physical and mental injuries that time will never heal. And the reason that justice is important is that when you break the law, that you're held accountable. And we have proven to you beyond a reasonable doubt that he was reckless. Everyone agrees that he was speeding. Even he himself does. And that his recklessness resulted in horror and tragedy that nobody ever wants to relive again. But just because we don't want to relive it or think about it or see those pictures, it really happened. And it's really his